All right, everybody, welcome to Creating and Improving Pollinator Habitat in the State of Ohio with Marci. Marci serves as the director for the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative and sits on the board for the Ohio Wildlife Management Association. She's worked in the field of wildlife for several years and has experience in research, endangered species, transportation ecology, and landscape habitat restoration. So Marci, thank you very much and welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I appreciate the opportunity to speak and talk about the different things going on in the state of Ohio and the importance of native plants and how we can help our pollinators, which will help other wildlife. So I am with the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative. I'm also the Central Ohio or District 6 Environmental Coordinator for ODOT. So I have my hand in a lot of things going on in the state of Ohio. The Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative is essentially a statewide network of universities, nonprofits, private organizations, state organizations, federal, you name it. Whoever wants to work with us on connecting and improving pollinator habitat for monarchs and butterflies and bees, birds, wildlife, we welcome them to join us as a partner in our efforts. What we started off was, we found out that the monarch butterfly was petitioned to be federally listed in 2015. And that's when I was with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where I served as one of the transportation liaisons for the Ohio Department of Transportation. And we knew right then and there that if the monarch butterfly was being petitioned to be federally listed, we were not doing good. We were not doing a good job out on the landscape. But we knew if we wanted to do an effort like this, it had to be more than just about monarchs. It had to be about monarchs, other pollinators, bees, birds, you name it, that all shared these habitats. So our missions and our purpose we came up with was to create and improve pollinator habitat across the state of Ohio, while at the same time increasing and improving the conservation awareness for all Ohioans so they understand what we're doing out there on the roadsides, what we're doing out in these restoration habitats, and why we're doing it, so that way it makes sense. So you see people out there just, spraying the roadsides or, these areas that look, I'll be honest, they can look very ugly the first couple years. Making sure people understand what you're doing and what it's going to look like helps you with longevity in those projects. So we have a lot of concerns about pollinators. Most people probably on this call know that pollinators are essential to our well-being. They're at the heart of healthy ecosystems. There's a lot of pressures against pollinators. We'll start with the monarch, which, monarchs and bee species, managed honeybees, there's lots of declines due to loss of habitat, spread of disease, overuse of pesticides and other various factors, increased infrastructure. So all these things are pressures that, push against the things that these species need to survive and thrive in our ecosystem. And when we have declining pollinators, that is a direct threat to the viability of agriculture production, of healthy long-term ecosystem health. And so for honeybees, it's not good. We know that we've been having honeybee colonies fall and collapse over the past half century. And since 2006, there's been beekeepers experiencing average losses at around 29 to 35% or more. Honeybee colony losses, again, attributed to disease and other factors, viruses, infestations, different things like that. And what's not included in this note is climate change. That is a big factor. Changes in the climate welcomes different viruses, welcomes different host, insects, things of that nature that are going to affect, our bees and our other species, funguses, for example. And numerous unmanaged pollinator species native to North America are having similar declines. And as we go through this presentation, you'll start to connect these dots. I like to build my presentations as kind of a dot connector. So you see how all these things are linked to the next thing. And so we know that about 25% of North America's bumblebee species have had significant and swift declines, especially the rusty patch bumblebee, which was federally listed now as threatened, and it is extirpated from the state of Ohio. So unfortunately, no more rusty patch bumblebee as far as we know, in the state of Ohio. And butterflies, these are also having significant issues. 17% are at risk of extinction, especially those that have special habitat needs. But we have the monarch, who's a specialist and a generalist, and that's been petitioned. It's going to be probably listed in the next couple of years. The monarch butterfly found across North America, seeing declines up to 80% east of the Rockies and 50% west. And the Corn Belt, which is where Ohio is located, we're on the east side of the Corn Belt. We know that we are responsible for about half of the adult monarch migration. So we have a lot of fourth generation monarchs that are born in Ohio, and their sole purpose is to get back down to Mexico and fly and get down there so they can continue that cycle again. So we have a lot of responsibility here in the Corn Belt where Ohio is. There's loss of breeding habitat for monarchs, which is the milkweed plant, and that is the host plant. So if you're a female monarch, you need to find milkweed. If you're going to lay eggs, you need to find milkweed, because that is the only plant that female monarchs will lay their eggs on. Once it becomes a butterfly, especially if it's a male butterfly, the need for milkweed goes away. All you're looking for are nectar plants and food to survive until you're either mate and perish, or you're a fourth generation and you just need to fly and eat to get to Mexico. And we know that there's a connection between loss of monarch and pollinator habitat with grassland birds, hummingbirds across the United States. We're seeing similar declines matching those of these different pollinators. And just to give you a little taste of what those declines, what this means in regard to nesting grassland birds, we see that, our nesting grassland birds typically have 3 bugs per trip to the nest. There's 7 trips per hour times 12 hours a day. That's about 252 bugs per day per nest. And each nest is roughly about 12 days of a nesting period. So each nest requires over 3,000 bugs for a nesting grassland bird, a typical nesting grassland bird. That's a lot of bugs. And so we know that grassland birds are using these habitats where pollinators thrive for food. It's a food plot for them. So by creating these habitats, we're not only helping pollinators, we're also helping our bird species. So anybody who's a birder knows that these are sometimes the nicest places to go birding are in really nice fields full of native wildflowers and grasses, because you're going to see cool grassland birds. But if we don't have those bugs, our birds are going to start seeing some declines as well. And so we know that pollinators are excellent ecosystem servants. So we know that pollinators are essentially human health well-being. I already said that. They help with agricultural production. An estimated 85% of the world's flowering plants depend on pollination. It's more than half of the plants. So if you think about the importance of pollinators, it's significant. They sustain wildland and plantland communities that provide food and shelter, like I just said. And even if you're not a birder, or even if you really don't care about wildflowers, if you're a hunter, or if you know somebody who hunts deer or turkey or quail or pheasant, these habitats sustain them as well, sustain these species that hunters want to hunt. So even if you really don't care about plants, but you're a hunter, you should care, because that's where these species live. And the intrinsic value, or the ecotourism of these habitats, is, immeasurable. Hiking and birding and sightseeing, all of us, if we've had a bad day and you go out into a field full of wildflowers and birds and bees and butterflies, that kind of knocks the bad day off just a little bit, I would imagine. So they're an indispensable component to healthy environments, and we're seeing more farm-to-table foods out there in restaurants. And so it's essential to make sure that we're not only looking at these areas in a large scale, but also in small scale. And so why do native plants matter? So, restoring native plants helps preserve biodiversity. It provides ecosystem health. Each patch becomes part of a collective effort to nurture and sustain the landscape for birds and other animals and humans. And so just to go through some of the benefits of native plants, they're low maintenance. They're native. They're supposed to be here. They're used to Ohio. There's not a whole lot of training or extra effort you need to make for brown-eyed Susan, black-eyed Susan, purple coneflower, wild bergamot. They don't need much help from you because they're used to where they live in Ohio. You know, I would say if you're doing a full restoration, there is some maintenance required the first couple of years. That's a given, but that'd be with any restoration until these things get established. And then it's really not much maintenance after that. They're beautiful. Most of these plants are showy, beautiful flowers with colors, bright yellows and purples and pinks. Really fun things to look at growing. And as they go out of bloom and some come in bloom, it's nice to see those transition. And it's healthy. It's a healthy place for people. When you're out walking, like I just said, you know, if you're having a really bad day, this is a great place to go and look at stuff. If you have blood pressure issues, it's been known, it's been noted that going for a walk, especially if it's a walk in some place that's quiet and beautiful, it lowers your blood pressure. It can help with your blood sugar. It really is a really good stimulant for good health. It helps, not a lot of people put these two together, but it helps with climate and conserving water. You know, these are, the root system of these plants are native. They're strong root systems. They go deep into the soil. They till the soil. They provide nutrients to the soil. They help with runoff from vehicles. It helps offset our carbon footprints because we're putting things in the roadsides. We're putting things in places where, you know, we're getting a lot of this nasty stuff, and these root systems can handle all of this. And then again, for wildlife, it's a multifaceted structure for not just pollinators, but terrestrial mammals, birds, insects, other things. So it's, and reptiles, it's a really good nurturing place for a multitude of species, including humans. Oh. And so just to give you a little glimpse of these root systems, the native plants on the right, you can see we've got 9-bark, black-eyed Susan, prairie dropsy, buffalo grass. Look at those root systems. 9-barks are amazing. So if anybody who has 9-bark, you probably just saw yours go out of bloom probably this last week, and they were just magnificent white blooms on this thing, but their root structure is amazing, and it just is unmatched. And if you look at the non-natives, which are easy plants to plant, and they grow fine, but they're not really providing much of a service in regard to root structure and soil health. And then we have, you know, native host plants. So plants play another role in regard to pollinators and species significance. You know, we've got the frosted elephant here on the left, and we've got the Carner blue butterfly on the right. And this is wild lupin in the middle, which is their host plant. So without this plant, we do not see these butterflies. And these butterflies are really, really rare to see. Only in small pockets of the state of Ohio would you see this. And you'd have to spend many days out looking for one to know, oh, I've seen one. We've got the northern pearly-eye, who is connected as a host plant, bottle brush grass, which is a cool grass, but we don't always think about grass as being a significant host plant, and that's a beautiful butterfly. Leonard skipper, believe it or not, their host plant, big blue stem, little blue stem. Indian grass is the host plant. Who'd have thunk it? And then our Liatris moth here, if we don't have the blazing star, we don't have this borer moth. So this is a blazing star borer moth. And if we don't have this plant, we don't see this. And this is a really, really rare moth. We don't see it, and it's nocturnal. So It's really hard for us to go out and find it, but the last place it was seen was at Wright Pat's Prairie Habitat, Huffman Prairie. And I think that was about 4 or 5 years ago. And then let's not forget our herb friends. They can play an essential role in your garden, attracting pollinators that would pollinate other food and plants. They can serve as host plants for pollinators. And if you're pairing up, like different vegetables and herbs, they can attract the predatory insects to control the pests on your vegetables. So we've got the anise hyssop, which is a perennial herb in the mint family, grows really, really well. Usually used for salads and teas, but also medicinally for sore throats and cold-like symptoms. Lots and lots of things love this. This is a really good hummingbird flower because it has the little entryways for the hummingbirds to nectar, and it's just a beautiful flower. And so what we like to do at my house is I call it decoy planting. And I plant my decoy herbs along the edge of my garden, and I plant the herbs that I want to keep in my boxes and cover them up. So that way I'm getting what I want, and I'm also providing a benefit to pollinators, and I just let them go to flower. And so that way everybody wins. We've got our basil, and there's a variety of tastes and smells and colors. And it's used to complement all kinds of things, used for digestion medicinally. And then we see lots of specialist pollinators on these because the flowers are so small and tiny that those little hair streaks, those little skippers, some of our smaller bee species can get into those flowers and pollinate them really well. And then if you let them go to seed, then you'll see an array of birds come to the plant as well. And then our onion chives, which is, kind of my favorite ones because they're just so cool looking, especially if you have so many in a row or in a huge box. You see these almost like paintbrush tops. They complement lots of different food. I even just throw them in my salad. I've got some growing outside my office. Sometimes I just grab one and smell it. It's just, a multifaceted plant. The garlic chives produce a dainty upright flower that's white. And then the onion chives have a small purple ball. And these guys mix together in a huge row. It's beautiful. The wind blows and you just see this kind of sea of little flowers going back and forth. It's easy to collect the seeds for replanting. It'll reseed itself. And pollinators love both of these, especially the specialist pollinators, the little tiny pollinators that'll crawl around on the tops of these because they're just the right size to get into all those little openings on the flowers. And then we've got our cilantro, which is not native, but it's a versatile, handles cooler temperatures, delicious, used in lots of different variety of cuisines and salads. It's also coriander. So if you're using the leaves, it's cilantro. If you let it go to seed, now you have coriander. So it's a twofer kind of herb. And it is also the host plant for black swallowtails. And I just want to draw attention real quick to, let me see if I can get a pointer up here. You can see here's the black swallowtail, here's the cocoon. Not very fancy. Wouldn't really think that was much of anything. You'd see it and maybe think it was part of the stem of the stick here, but it's not. This is the cocoon of the black-tailed swallowtail. So make sure that you're paying attention when you're out in the garden, because if you see something like this, that is going to be this. And just one step further, this is the egg. It looks very similar to the tops of these cilantro buds. So make sure you're looking when you're out harvesting, looking for these little yellow dots because they're not very obvious, especially if you have any flowers because they almost look like the tops of one of the flowers. And then our dill, which is another host plant for black swallowtail caterpillars, also loved a multitude of other pollinators. And if you love pickles, you love dill because that's what we get in our dill pickles. So yeah, it's got lots of different uses here. And you can see our little bee right here. Oregano. This is, I basically put oregano on everything. I love oregano. It's a perennial. It does well in cooler climates. It's also in the mint family. It's also very rich in antioxidants, helps with inflammation and immune systems. You can actually buy oregano pills at the drugstore, and it sends up stalks of dense clusters of little small white purple flowers that lots of you can see here that this carpenter bee is going to get in there, but he's probably working pretty hard. This is much better for our little smaller pollinating species because they can get into all those little cracks and crevices and get all that pollen out of there. And so when we're thinking about native plants, we're thinking about planting pollinator habitat, we want to start thinking about it in priority setting approaches. What do we want to plant? Why do we want to plant it? And what's the approach? What's the priority? And so when we think about Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative, planting these habitats, we want to have a diversity of plants and flowers out there. Warm season grasses, and we want to also, for structure, we also want to see a multitude of different types of flowers. So whether that's your black-eyed Susan, it's your blanket flower, it's your butterfly weed, it's your purple coneflower, you name it. We want to see all those different types of flowers out there because not all pollinators are built the same. We start thinking about the sizes of these things. We want to make sure that we're giving them a place where they can get the food they need. And we also want to provide additional nutrients. We don't want to have just one plant out there. We want a multitude of nutrients. If you got into your fridge and all you ate was bread all the time, that would be not good. You'd be nutrient deficient. And so we want to make sure that just like we like to have lots of different food in our refrigerator, these guys have different food out in the field for them. And we also want to make sure we have 3 seasons of blooms throughout the season. So at least 3 in the spring, at least 3 in the summer, and at least 3 in the fall. And so that way we know that if we have at least 3 blooming plants per season, we're giving pollinators that chance to have a good nutrient-rich diet. But it goes on a little bit further. So the important factors are size, color, and shape, like I was just saying. And, we have plants like our Coreopsis down here, where that's easy for a monarch butterfly to land on and do what they need to do. And it's probably easy here too on this common milkweed. However, these guys also have little intricate openings where our little specialists can get in there. Or we want our hummingbirds to land here so they can get into these balloon-shaped petals. So we want to make sure that we're giving them all these opportunities for their anatomy to get what they need. And so pollination, carrying pollen from the male to the female plant for reproduction. And when you're thinking about this, if you're thinking of pollinators like a keystone species, where they're creating these habitats, they're help keeping these habitats thriving for a multitude of other species, they can be an indicator of ecosystem health. And like I said, 85% of flowering plants rely on pollination. That's about 240,000 different plants. And it's an essential part of the global food supply, global food webs, and protection of biodiversity. We know that they're going to play a vital role in economic agricultural production, about $24 billion in the US economy each year. It's because of a pollinated plant. And if you think about it in terms of food, here's just a short list of my favorite things that I put together. This isn't the full list, just the things that Marci likes, where you can see there's a lot of stuff that we won't have, or it's going to be really hard to get if we're continuing down the road of pollinator decline. I'm sure that some of you would be lost without your morning coffee, and some of you you'd be equally lost without your chocolate. And then I don't eat meat, so I need lots of these things. So as a non-carnivore, this starts to get a little scary for me, especially the coffee. I'll just leave this up here for a second so you guys can see it. Oh, let's not forget about the tequila. And so kind of connecting the dots even further, we know that helping monarchs helps pollinators and helps other wildlife. But just to touch on some of the other great pollinators out there, our common eastern bumblebee, one of our most important pollinating insects. A large percentage of our native flowering plants gets pollinated by eastern bumblebees. And we know that our sweat bee is out there, and look at this guy. He is green, but he looks yellow because he's got so much, he's working hard. He's got all this pollen on him. He almost looks golden instead of this green sweat bee. We've got our flower fly, which is one of my favorite ones because it's a fly with a bee body. It's just so cool. It's a mimic species, and it has evolved with bees to look that way as a protection for it. About 900 species in North America, north of Mexico. They're everywhere. If you stand out in a field long enough, you'll have hundreds of them land on you. And our flower scarab beetles, they do pollinating for us. We don't really think of beetles as a pollinator. Also ants. Ants are great pollinators. They are out there pollinating. Unbeknownst to them, they're just traveling, but they're moving pollen around on those legs. And then our sweet little hummingbird, ruby-throated hummingbird here, also helping out. That's bee balm. A multitude of other species utilize these habitats. It's all connected. And so we know that great pollinator habitat equals great wildlife habitat, which is also great sustainable landscape conservation. Connecting all these dots leads us to this overarching sustainable landscape conservation effort. And so Ohio is very diverse. We have lots of areas in the state of Ohio, woodlands, lakes and ponds and streams, riparian corridors, grasslands, wetland habitats. There's all kinds of opportunities in the state of Ohio to do good stuff. So I'd like to show this slide just to give an example of what I mean by having all these opportunity areas. And if you can imagine that this was Westerville, and just an area in Westerville that we kind of cut off a map. And we've got some conservation reserve and wetland reserve programs happening in Westerville, where we have some pollinator habitat being restored. And then we've got some roads, railroads, right-of-ways. I know Westerville's very good about, planting flowering trees, trying to do an effort and making sure things are more naturalized, and on the highways and things like that. So we've got these efforts. Schools, churches, and businesses who want to do a project or want to be more conservation minded or want to create a wet lab for kids to get out of the classroom and into the field. Those are all opportunities to create conservation pollinator habitats. Parks and golf courses and cemeteries, these areas have to be mowed a lot. And so if we can find pockets of areas that don't need to be mowed, and those can be converted into a conservation or a pollinator habitat, then the mowing can stop and they're saving money. And we're also creating good habitat and good conservation. Prisons and airports and fairgrounds, again, lots of mowing has to occur there. We can find ways to stop that mowing and create pockets of sustainable habitat that's restored for wildlife and pollinators. That's always a plus. And then backyards. There's so many backyards that have opportunity areas, whether it's in a pot, whether it's next to the porch, whether you've got 1/4 of an acre, 10 by 10 plot. It's really, there's no set size or limit. And then the ultimate way that you can help is by planting mental seeds. Maybe you don't have a porch. Maybe you've got an apartment. You don't even have room to put a potted plant. But you can tell your neighbor who has a backyard about this. That's planting a mental seed, which is sometimes as or more important than planting the physical seed in the ground. And so we know that we have a lot of pressures and that we're all a part of the solution. pollinators and other animals, they face a lot of challenges, including humans. There's habitat loss, disease, parasites. We're dealing in environmental contaminants, climate change. But what we have learned in our efforts since we've started this in 2015 is that working across the state with multiple partners, including agricultural producers, to improve and come up with mutually beneficial conservation practices is key in making good conservation change in the state of Ohio. It can't be just one of us. We've all got to be a part of it. And so we've kind of coined the all you can, where you can slogan, because whether you're planting a mental seed or you're planting a physical seed, that's what it's going to take to make this work. It's all hands on deck. Whether you're in an urban area, a suburban area, or a rural area, there's always something you can do to help. And so just a couple examples of some of the things we can do. We have here, we've got solar panels where we've got pollinator habitat planted under the arrays, which is not normal. We've got an area next to the roadside that's been planted in conservation habitat, flowers and grasses. We're not mowing that. We have an area here where this is all just grass. It's the same area, except now we've got warm season grasses creating a buffer for agricultural production. So we've got the areas on the side here, and this is all grass, but just because it's grass doesn't mean it doesn't have a positive benefit for wildlife. Here we've created some buffer areas next to corn. So what we're doing here, even though corn doesn't require pollination, this extra buffer area here is keeping this soil intact and keeping it well drained, so this farmer stops losing acres over time through soil loss. Grazing, you can do this for grazing, doing an every other year rotational making hay. So this stays in, this gets plowed. The following year, this one comes back in, this one gets plowed. And in our own backyards, there's always something we can do somewhere. It's pretty and it's good. And we have a lot of groups who want to help us with this effort. And this is only really just a snapshot of a lot of the groups that we work with. We may not work with them every day, but we've worked with them in some way. We may have worked with some more than others. But they all deserve being recognized. However, I started running out of room on this slide and could not fit any more logos in here so you could see them. So I just say now and more partners than that. And that's what I have for you today. Again, I'm Marci Lanninger. I'm the director for the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative, the district environmental coordinator for ODOT's District 6, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Thank you, Marci. That was very, very informational, and the pictures were great. So thank you for that. Now, everybody, as a reminder, at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat feature. So if you have some questions, please feel free to open that up and go ahead and enter them in. I had a couple. So you mentioned basil and oregano, and a lot of times the ones we see in seed, say like Genovese or Thai basil, that kind of thing, are those considered non-native or are those native?
Those, I'm pretty sure those are considered non-native, but it's not like, so where I'm at with native and non-native plants, most people would think that I am hardcore about native plants, but if it's not an invasive species, it's not an aggressive species, it's not something that's going to take over my yard, it's not something that's going to be a negative benefit, I have no problem planting something non-native that's not aggressive, that's not invasive, it's going to be well contained, and it's going to provide a food supply to a pollinator or a bird.
Easy enough. Thank you. All right, and you did mention flowers for each season, like keeping them going for each season. Can you tell us, like off the top of your head, could you tell us some things that bloom in, spring, summer, and fall in a way that we could do this successive blooming?
Sure. So in the spring, you're going to get there's different structures. So a lot of the things that's going to be blooming early in the spring are going to be your trees, a lot of your apple, cherry, dogwoods, your lilacs, irises are going to start to come out. And then as you move into the summer, you're going to see your coreopsis, you're going to see your wallflowers, you're going to see a multitude of other things, your ninebarks, and the black-eyed Susans are going to start budding here. They're going to start opening up. Get it for a little further, you're going to start seeing goldenrods. There is the non-native goldenrod. There's native goldenrods that are out there. Flat top goldenrod's a really nice one. And you're going to start seeing your asters. And if some of you know your plants, you're probably already having a lot of your fleabanes blooming. So there's some early blooming fleabanes. There's late blooming fleabanes. Dogbanes, not bad either. And so yeah, so you'll start getting into the fall, and that's kind of the hardest part because it's really a lot of aster. That's really a lot of goldenrod. So trying to get more things out there. And again, like I said, I'm not opposed to planting something that's not native, that's not aggressive, blanket flower, things like that. That's going to provide a food, that's going to provide a nutrient, and it's not the only thing you're planting. So your blazing stars, those are kind of late summers. Those are really nice. Again, your milkweeds, those are going to start. Actually, there's some blooming now because things are weird out there. So I don't usually start seeing my flowers blooming until later, but I'm starting to get buds on a lot of my common milkweed, swamp milkweeds. World milkweed's a really good one. So world milkweed is amazing because it doesn't care. You can plant it in the worst place and it will thrive and do great. I love world milkweed, and it's got a really pretty world leaf, and it's also got a really pretty flower, white flower on it. That's really nice.
Thank you. And Marty says downy skullcap is also a late summer bloom.
Oh, thanks, Marty.
All right. And also, do you have any recommendations for speaking with HOAs about basically not cutting a lawn, that kind of thing?
Yes, I have experience speaking to HOAs regarding this because everybody's got their own rules and regulations and what they consider to be a noxious weed or an unwanted, unattractive plant. And so really speaking with HOAs is all about compromise. And it's going to be more so you compromising with them and getting what you can get, and then doing a good job. So usually when we speak to an HOA, we go with a pilot project. We pick a plot or a person's yard and we say, we just want to try this. We'll try these plants that are mutually agreed upon. And we make sure that we do a really good job on that pilot and make sure it looks really nice. And we try to pick things that are pretty, that are showy and colorful. And so that way we can say, look, this can be at the height that you want. It can have beautiful colors. It can look nice and also be a benefit to pollinators and birds. And that's not your typical daylily or spirea or something like that. So yes, it's all about the conversation, starting small, real small, doing a good job on that small pilot project, and then advancing it from there.
Thank you. Also, I don't know if it's on your website or if you have any recommendations. If somebody is looking to do this, are there any programs that can help you? So one big thing in people's mind is cost. So a way to get plants, a way to, donate your yard to let a group do it. Does anything like that exist?
Yeah, so it depends. So for cost share and things like that, it typically has to be, if you're going to be a part of a federal program or a state program like Conservation Reserve or an NRCS program, it has to have some sort of agricultural tie to it. However, the Department of Ag is seeing the resources that bees have brought to agriculture, and they're looking at that more realistically. So if you're wanting to build a food plot for bees, managed honeybees or wild native bees, then there's a program you can participate in with the USDA that will help you pay for those restoration opportunities for bees. But OPHI, we're willing to help and work with landowners all across the state of Ohio, whether that we are able to help you get the plants and the seed through grants, or whether we're able to collaborate with a partner and get plants or seeds that way. So we will also try and help. We don't provide any actual money to anybody, but what we do is we create a partnership. We have a contract that you'd sign, and basically just says, you know, you're saying you're going to do this, and OPHI says we're going to do this, and here's the stipulations of the contract, which usually just means, you know, we want to be able to come out and monitor it. You need to manage it for invasive species, have 3 blooming plants per season, meet these little bit of criteria, and we're usually able to help you get this done.
All right, thank you. And Marty says Westerville has a health strip tree lawn planting effort underway. There's a new group on Facebook called Westerville Health Strip Gardeners. Thank you. And I know Clintonville also has one. You can find all these guys online. And I put up, I think I found the bee program you were talking about from the USDA. I put that as a link in there. Now I have a question. I write a lot of grants. So when you say, like, if somebody's writing a grant and you'll help, does that mean you'll help write it, or you'll look over it, or what does that mean?
Well, if you're writing a grant and you want some match, or you want some assistance in regard to, so sometimes since we're a nonprofit, you can reach out to us and say, hey, would you be willing to match this through, usually us, we don't have any money. Everything we have goes back out into conservation. So if somebody makes a donation to us, that goes right back into restoration projects. But what we can do is help you in regard to, one, we can help review it for you. We can help write a part of it. We can write a letter supporting it. We can match you with boots on ground time for technical assistance, which is as good as money for a grant. So there's different ways that we can partner with you on grants, or maybe we write a grant, or maybe we're applying for a grant and we see your project as meeting some of those grant opportunities for us, so we can include that in our grant. So there's different ways that can work.
That's fair. Would you mind pulling up the Ohio Pollinator Habitat Initiative website and maybe showing us some of the things that are available there?
I don't know if you can still see my screen, can you?
I still see the end of the PowerPoint.
Okay, hang on. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just to let you guys know, the website's still going through some growing pains here. So things will change over time. So like we have a sponsor right now, that sponsor might change. It just depends on where the projects are and who wants to work with us. So we've got our contact us page. We've got information about why pollinators. Why? You know, we talk about a lot of the things I just went through, what we're doing to try and help, what you can do to work with us, our constitution, our bylaws, all of the efforts, the different groups that we work with pretty regularly on things, and a link to their websites on our resources page. These are essentially the pollinator habitat recommendations. This goes through, if I was to come out and do a site assessment, this is a lot of what I would say. So looking at this first and thinking about it and then getting a hold of me is probably a good idea, because then you'll have an idea of what I'm going to tell you. And no property is the same. You know, you could have 1/4 of an acre, and I could look at your 1/4 of an acre and give you the same instructions I'd give somebody who has an acre. It just depends on what your goals are for the restoration. And based on the goals of the restoration is how I come up with my assessment. And I also base it on what's the vegetation there currently. If you have an HOA, different factors. So nothing's a cookie cutter. We have our milkweed seed collection. We do a milkweed pod collection every year. We average about 3,000 to 4,000 gallons of pods a year. All of those seeds are harvested out of those pods and redistributed out as far as projects or outreach and education, as seed packets, you name it. This is our milkweed wildflower seed request form. We don't always have wildflower seeds, but sometimes we do, so that's why that's on there. We almost always have milkweed because that's what we do. We try and make sure that we're getting that monarch host plant back out on that landscape, because a lot of the support we get is from the monarch joint venture. So we try and make sure that we're meeting those goals. We also have our solar site pollinator planning assessment form. And solar companies reach out to us all the time because that's a huge footprint, putting in solar panels. It's a lot of impact on the landscape. And so the EPA, and even for me at ODOT, the EPA requires us within the first year after construction, there needs to be 80% coverage of vegetation back on that soil. And so that's no different for solar companies. And a lot of them are thinking more conservation minded these days. So we've come up with a scorecard to help them create habitat and create conservation habitat as opposed to just throwing grass down and mowing. And this is the letter that we send out for groups who want to help us with the milkweed pod collection. Tips on how to collect and what to look for, what not to collect. And then how to be an official partner with us. This is a letter that people download, fill out, and send to us in the email. Ongoing projects, we're working on at Deer Creek. We have some other projects that we're also working on that aren't up here yet, but there's really only like 3 people, like actually 2.5 people working on this, and I'm working on it most of the time. So it's hard to keep up with stuff, but these are the partners who are helping us with that project. So we always try to make sure that we're naming or showing our partners that we're giving those contributors a chance to be seen on the website, because without those partners, we are nothing. We are nothing without our partners. And then our contact. This is my phone number. If you called this right now, my phone would ring. My cell phone would ring. This is my direct line. So I don't joke around. And then you can donate to us if you'd like to. Like I said, we're a 501(c)(3). Just actually got that this past year. We've gone through a lot of growth, and we've been around since 2015 and decided it was time to pull the trigger and become a full-fledged nonprofit. And so now you can donate to us. And like I said, all the donations, everything we have goes right back out into conservation, whether it's restoration or it's educational materials. None of us get paid. This is all labor of love, and none of us have a salary.
That is amazing. Well, thank you for showing us this. This is a good resource for us, especially if we want to talk to other people. All right, everybody, looking at the chat right now to see if there are any other questions. This is last call for questions. Okay, looks like radio silence. Marci, thank you so much again. This was informative and entertaining. Again, great pictures. Good job. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to teach us all something. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate it. And this was a lot of fun. I always enjoy speaking about this. And if anybody needs to get a hold of us, you know how to do it now.
That sounds great. Thanks. All right, and everybody.
Take care, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And Marci, I will send you what is it called? I will send you a copy of the video. I don't know, maybe you could put it up on your website.
Oh, that'd be great. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And everybody else, you will get a copy or a link to the program shortly, as soon as I finish editing it. You'll also get a survey that gives you a chance to recommend future programming and a copy of the chat, which has all of those, all of the links and a couple of the lists that which I could type down fast enough. So thank you for coming, and everybody, thank you. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.